All right, thanks everybody. I'm Joel. You might remember me from before, you might not. And I'm going to talk about using AI to answer science questions. So a little bit about me. I am a research engineer at the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence, where I try and teach computers to answer science questions. Previously, I was a software engineer at Google, and I did data science at a bunch of startups before that. I wrote a book. You should read it. I write a blog sometimes. You should read that too. I co-host a podcast called Adversarial Learning. Please listen to it. And I actually grew up here, Dunwoody High School, class of, yeah, those were the good old days. Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit about AI2, because you might not know about it. It was founded in 2014 by Paul Allen. It's a research nonprofit. And we research AI systems with reasoning, learning, and reading capabilities. And we're located in Seattle. I've been there about a year. Look at our website, you can see our motto is AI for the common good. We do that through a handful of projects. One is Aristo, which I'm going to talk to you about today. We also have Semantic Scholar, which is AI-based search for academic papers. Euclid, which is basically natural language understanding for math problems. And Plato, which addresses some computer vision stuff, sort of all over the place. And so, like I said, I work on the Aristo project. And Aristo is a project to answer questions with a knowledgeable machine. So what does that mean? Natural language parsing and processing, question understanding, as well as some diagram processing, and figuring out ways to solve these questions. So if you look on the left, you can see an example of the sort of science questions that we're testing ourselves against. That's actually a pretty easy one. Growing thicker fur in the winter helps some animals to keep warm. Okay, that's not hard. Why are we doing this? Why are you teaching computers to answer science questions? Why is that a good use of anyone's time or money? And so the idea is that, if we can start small and get bigger, there's a lot of general and scientific knowledge out there. And if we can train computers to answer questions about it, it can answer medical questions, it can answer really obscure science questions, it can reason over things. And our just initial focus, so we have like tangible goals and things to focus on, is to look at science exams, currently 4th and 8th grade kind of standardized science exams, and a lot of emphasis on machine reading, basically, where we don't give you all the facts, but we just give you some text and you learn from it. So this is kind of an example question we'll look at throughout the talk, to show that it's not completely trivial what we're doing. Max is doing an experiment on tomato plants. His hypothesis is a tomato plant will not grow in a shady area. On which of these relationships did Max base his hypothesis? And so you have, warm temperature causes plant growth, sunlight causes plant growth, tall plants cause shade, new plants need fresh water. So this is interesting because, one, the question is actually several sentences long, where different sentences refer to previous sentences. And the second thing is that every one of these answers is standing on its own true in a sense. Some are more true than others, but none of them are really false statements. And so you really have to do some reasoning to say, given the question itself, which one of these answers it? And in this case, it's sunlight causes plant growth. And just some other example questions. A bird is hatched from an egg. Which stage most likely comes next in its life cycle? Okay, that's relatively simple. How does the length of daylight in New York State change from summer to fall? Okay, well now you need to know something about what is New York State. You need to know something about how do the seasons change. And it's very susceptible to changes in wording. If it said from fall to summer, the answer would be the opposite. Knowing facts about what are the senses in the human body. What part of a bicycle best moves in a circle? So now you have to know something about bicycles and their parts and how they move. And then here's a pretty elaborate one. During science class, students combine iron fillings with sand to create a mixture. Which would be best for separating the iron fillings from the sand, or filings. So this is not a simple question where you can just kind of look up the answer. It requires knowing things about sand and about metal and about which of these what these processes mean, straining, dragging a magnet, which would work. So I hope that gives you a sense that this is not just a trivial problem. So how does Aristo do it? Well, we have a lot of questions. We have a lot of corpuses over on the left of web documents, sentences, flashcards, through some curation and information extraction. we have basically a big knowledge base of tables and tuples and sentences and rules. And then those go into, we have an ensemble of all these different solvers that use different techniques. They go through a combiner that basically says, okay, here's all the solvers and their scores. Let's pick the best answer. And then we judge ourselves against a secret test set. And like I said, I'm a research engineer. What does that mean? So I'm not a researcher. The researchers are typically, academic types of PhDs who write papers. That's not me. I'm more of an engineer who speaks the language of research. So I mostly understand neural networks, but I'm not the one writing papers about them or coming up with like new kinds of them. And so I can come up with ideas for science question solvers, but not good ideas, as you'll see in the rest of this talk. So I'm going to be talking about a project called Aristo Mini. Aristo Mini is basically an open source stripped down version of Aristo, which you can go on GitHub and download and play with. That will allow you to try out your own ideas for science question solving. And I gave a talk recently and I mentioned Aristo Mini. And someone came up to me after the talk and said, hey, did you know that if you Google Aristo Mini, one of the first results is a picture of a guy in his underwear? And I said, no, I didn't know that, but thanks for telling me. So now consider yourself warned if you feel the need to Google it somewhere. I think his briefs, Aristo is like the style, or I'm not sure. But so why did we create this Aristo Mini project? Well, the main Aristo code base is tens of thousands of lines, very complex infrastructure. And tech debt. And we don't think that the Git history contains any passwords, but how can you really be sure? And we wanted a simple open source version so that people could try their own ideas and maybe come up with something cool. And the Aristo project itself does multiple choice, fill in the blank, diagram questions. Here's a food web, here's a picture of a food web, which animal listed is a producer and which is a consumer. But Aristo Mini just focuses on these simple multiple choice questions. And it also has a much simpler architecture. There's an evaluation service which runs in Scala, so you need Scala to run it, but you don't need to know Scala. And you write a solver, and then you can look at the results in your web browser. And so you want to write a solver. A solver is just a web service with two endpoints, one of which is real simple. It just returns the name of the solver, which is whatever you want it to be. You can write it in whatever language you like. The repo has examples in Scala and Python. Today we'll talk Python. I figured that would be most amenable to this kind of audience. And so if you want to solve science questions, you probably need some sort of data. So the ideal data for building a system to answer science questions would be millions and millions of science questions, but we don't have that. And if you have that, please let me know, because I would like to have that. So anyway, with Aristo Mini, you get some science sentences. So it comes with this mini corpus, which is basically about 1.2 million sentences. And they have a lot of science facts in them. So if you say, well, what does this corpus know about blubber? Here's a bunch of sentences about blubber. Thick fur and blubber are two ways that some animals stay warm. That's something good to know if you want to answer science questions. If you look at friction, you also get some sentences that they make sense, but they don't tell you anything. Like here it says the mechanical energy will come from friction. That probably made sense in its original context, but here out of context, it doesn't mean anything. So you gotta be aware that you have a lot of sentences like that. And worse, the corpus, I asked a couple people how we came up with it, and I got a bunch of different answers, none of which were real compelling, but there's a lot of junk. So like, how many sentences are there that have between 1 and 10 characters? They're probably not good sentences. That it's 35,000. And you can see it's name, period, random HTML junk. And it has stuff, not a lot, but it has some stuff from like different languages and different alphabets. So you gotta watch out for that too. When you run this evaluation framework, you get a page that looks like this. We didn't spend a lot of time on CSS. And here's, okay, we ran it against one of the exams that came with it, and this is the score. It got 25% correct. So yeah, so let's talk about how to build a solver. So a solver is basically, in Python, you just have to subclass this thing, which has two methods: answer question and solver info. And I use Python 3 type annotations because I'm a big Python 3 type annotation person. You have a multiple answer question takes a multiple choice question and returns a multiple choice answer. So multiple choice question is a stem, which is the, what is the name of the blah, 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 and it has some choices. And the choices are the answers. And then the multiple choice answer it wants back is just a confidence for each choice. So say, for choice A, 0.9, for choice B, 0.2, choice 3, 0.4, and whatever. So really what you have to do is figure out a way to come up with those confidences. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways you could do this. Some of them good, some of them bad. And if you go and look at allenai.org, under the Aristo project, there's a lot of research papers about how Aristo works. So, you know, using semantic parsing on the question to get these logical forms, and then building them into trees, and then using these structured tables, and then feeding them into an integer linear programming model, and then canonical schema induction, and then using a causal convolutional network, and you know, looking at table cells, and then doing this sort of hardcore logical inference, and depends on graphs. And so, like, if you know that stuff, and if that stuff is your thing, like, please go look at those papers. They're really interesting. But they're all really complicated, and I wouldn't be able to explain them to people because I don't really understand them. For us to talk, I'm going to talk about some less good ideas, but that are more understandable, that maybe will inspire you to try something yourself. So, you know, whenever you do something like this, like, what's the simplest thing I can do? Well, you know, like the kid who forgot to study for a test, the simplest thing you can do is guess at random. So, you know, flip a coin or pick a random number or whatever. And so if you, Aristo Mini actually comes with a random guesser solver, so you don't even have to implement it yourself. It's there for you. You can run it. And as you would expect, it gets about 25% correct on any given test. So, you know, 25% is not a real good score, but we know it's better than 0%. So that's, 25% is kind of our baseline. And so the question is, can we do better? And the answer is yes, we can do better. Okay, so solver number one is information retrieval. So we saw a talk earlier about, you know, Solar and Lucene and like all the really sophisticated things you can do with a search engine, and we're not going to do anything sophisticated like that. But the motivating idea is, what would Google do? So, you know, one approach to, if you didn't know anything about these questions, you could type each question and answer into Google, see how many results came back, and pick the answer that had the most number of results come back. So, you know, we can take our science sentences and, you know, feed them into Elasticsearch. And a simple algorithm would basically be, okay, I have a question and I have an answer choice. Just concatenate them, you know, get the top n results out of Elasticsearch. And when you do an Elasticsearch query, each result comes back with a score saying how good a match it was, and you just sum up those scores. And your solver says, okay, the confidence about each of these answers is the sum of the scores. And here we can just use the top one result. So the best match, what's its score? And whichever one is the highest, that'll be our answer. And so it turns out if you do that, you get 43% correct, which again is not a great number, but it's actually quite a step up from 25%. And it gets right, our max is doing an experiment on tomato plants question. So, you know, 43% is not great, but it's like, yay, 43%, right? That's better than 25. And so, why does it get this question right? Well, if you look in the corpus, there's a sentence that says, hypothesis, I believe that the more sunlight a tomato plant receives, the larger the tomatoes will grow. Well, that looks a lot like our question and a lot like our answer. And if you look at the scores that come back, it turns out that for each of these answers, that's the top result that comes back, but comes up with a different score for each one because it's a better match for some of them than for others. So it gets it right. But it's also very lucky in a sense. You know, that's a great sentence for that question. So it has hypothesis in it. I believe that the more sunlight a tomato plant receives, so it's got sunlight in it, and it's got grow in it, so it's going to be a great match. If you take that one sentence out of the corpus, suddenly it gets it wrong. And it says, you know what, the best match is now tomato plants need a lot of water. So it's not really understanding the question at all. It's just doing this blind fumbling of, I got a good score concatenating things together with this sentence, so that's going to be the answer. So it's, in this case, it's very fragile. But it's also not very exciting, right? Okay, so we put it in a search engine and the search engine. it might be better to do something that's a little bit, more interesting. So that leads us to solver number 2, which is the PMI solver, based on the idea of pointwise mutual information. So what we can do is we can say, imagine we had a lot of pairs of questions and answers. Then one thing you could do is you could say, what is the probability of seeing this question and answer paired together relative to the probability of seeing the question and the probability of seeing the answer? Or if you use the definition of conditional probability and look at the bottom, it is how much more likely are we to see the answer with the question or given the question than we are just to see it overall. And so we don't have these pairs of questions and answers, but what we do have is we have like a bunch of sentences. And so instead of saying, how often do we see this question and answer pair occurring together, we can pull, 1 grams and 2 grams out of the question and 1 grams and 2 grams out of the answer and say, in those sentences, how frequently do we see those question grams and answer grams occurring together versus how often they occur separately. And we might even want to say, we'll only count them as occurring together if they're within, say, 10 words of each other, so that we don't end up with an 100-word sentence and saying they're related. So this is a way we could compute PMI. And then given a question and an answer, we just break them up into all these little 1 grams and 2 grams and skip 2 grams and take the average pairwise PMI for each question gram and each answer gram. And it turns out if you do that, you get 51% correct on this, the same set of 432 questions. And 51%, that's more than half even. So that's like halfway to where we want to be. And it turns out that, again, this method also gets right our max is doing experiment question, although not by much, right? The new plant seed freshwater scores pretty highly. And if you want to say, where are these scores coming from? We can say, which are the question grams and answer grams that contribute the most to these PMIs. And so this tomato in the question with causes growth in the answer, that contributes a lot, and that comes from the sentence below where plants such as beans, lettuce, and tomatoes do not use the carbon dioxide sufficiently, causing their growth to be slower and have lower yields. Tomato occurs with tall plant, that also contributes a lot. And so again, what you can see is that neither of these sentences really addresses the question either, right? The question was about sunlight, and these are not about sunlight. But here now we're looking across kind of every sentence, where before we were just taking the top sentence, and so it seems to do something pretty nice. The third solver, which is pretty interesting, is one that's called ACME. And so the idea now, if you think about before what we did, we said, what's the probability of seeing the answer given the question compared to just the probability of seeing the answer? Here, now we're going to say, what's the probability of seeing this question and answer given some concept compared to what's the probability of just seeing the question and answer? So if we had some notion of concept or some concept of concept, we could say, what's the probability of seeing a word given a concept compared with the probability of seeing the word? So what is a concept? Well, I found a file within AI2, but you could easily source your own, of a bunch of science concepts. So this is how it starts off, and there's about 1,000 of them, I think. And so the idea here is every sentence, we can assign it all the concepts that appear in it. So if there's a sentence that says something about rocks wear away because of abrasion by sand, then that sentence would get tagged with abrasion as a concept, and maybe sand as a concept, and rocks as a concept. And so we go through and we label every one of the 1.2 million sentences with all the concepts that appear in it. And again, we take each question and answer pair and generate these 1 grams and 2 grams words and pairs of words and skip pairs of words. And then for each concept, we say, what is the average PMI of the question and answer with this concept? So that kind of gives us a score of, does this question and answer pair represent the concept in some sense? And the score, for the question and answer pair will just be the average PMI of the best concept. So whatever the best concept is for that question and answer pair, that's the score we'll give it. So, you know, if given some sort of 1 gram or 2 gram in a concept, I find the total number of sentences, the number of sentences that contain the gram, the number of sentences that contain the concept, the number of sentences that contain both, and I just, you know, do that math to compute the PMI. And then for if I have a specific concept and a bunch of grams, I just take the average PMI with them. And then if I have a question and an answer, I just concatenate them and find the concept with the highest concept PMI. And so if I do this, I get 46%. And you know, that's a little bit worse than we got with that PMI solver, which was 51%, but it's still pretty good. And if you were to kind of ensemble a bunch of these, you'd probably get better results than most of them individually. But it gets a little bit more interesting when you look at what are these concepts. So, you know, for each of these, I can say, what is the score? And we said the score is going to be the PMI with the highest PMI in concept. You know, so for this one, 1.44 is the score, and the highest scoring concept was temperature. And that's the concept for the combination of the question and that answer. For B, the best concept was sunlight. For C, the best concept was plant. And for D, the best concept was plant. So this one, again, picked the right answer. It's interesting, you know, you can look further down and say, okay, for each of these answers, what were the top concepts that ACME identified? So for this first one where the answer was warm temperature causes plant growth, it says, you know, the relevant concepts here are temperature, growth, cause, plant, soil, growth, sunlight. You know, for sunlight causes plant growth, it was sunlight, plants intend to grow, cause, soil, photosynthesis, nutrients. Tall plants cause shade, plant, sunlight, vegetation, tree, leaf grow. New plants need fresh water, plant growth, fertile soil, water, growth, sunlight. So there's something sort of interesting going on here, which is that we didn't bake, ACME is not really understanding what's going on, but at the same time, it's doing a pretty nice job from kind of a casual judgment point of view of identifying relevant concepts to each of these answers. Like there's nothing in here where you say, wow, that doesn't make any sense. But all it's doing is looking at basically the PMI of each of those concepts with the question and answer pair. And so I was actually really kind of pleasantly surprised with how this turned out and how well it worked. And I thought it was pretty cool. So solver number 4, everyone's favorite word2vec. So the idea is, as with word2vec, you assign a word, a vector in some low-dimensional space, and you can compute similarity between words by how closely do those two vectors point in the same direction. And so, you know, you do a lot of nifty tricks where you say, oh, the difference between the man, woman, or the man vector and the woman vector is the same as the uncle vector and the aunt vector. And the difference between the king vector and the king's vector is the same as, not the same, but similar to the difference between the queen vector and the queen's vector. So it learns these kind of both syntactical and semantic relationships just by looking at words that co-occur together. So that's kind of cool. And so you'd like to be able to take that and do something with the science questions. So, you know, you could use pre-trained word vectors. They're easy to find and download. Or we could train our own on the science sentences, which is what I did. So if you train a word2vec model on the science sentences, the results are pretty cool. You know, if you say, what is the most similar word to dinosaur, you get all these things that are either dinosaurs or they sound like dinosaurs. I don't know what all of them are. But so that seems promising. And if you want to know what are the easy sciences, you can say, let's take science minus hard plus easy. And so then you get like philosophy and anthropology and astronomy. Don't tell any of those people that that's what I got. And if you do the opposite and say, what's science plus hard minus easy, then you get laboratory and geology and physics, and then anthropology shows up again for some reason. It's both hard and easy. And so one thing you can do that's sort of naive and not great is for each word in the question, I embed it as a vector. For each word in the answer, I embed it as a vector, and I take the average of the question vectors, the average of the answer vectors, and say, how similar directions do those point in? And there's some obvious ways that goes wrong. I mean, if you stick a not in the sentence, then that's not going to change the embedding very much, but it's going to change the meaning of the question entirely. Or if you change the order of the words, it'll be the same vectors. So you won't catch that. And if you do this, you get 38% correct. Still gets this, Max is doing his permanent question correct, but in general, it doesn't do as well as some of these other methods. And Word2Vec is very, people like to talk about it, and it can do a lot of neat things, but it's not very good in this context. And so with our favorite example question, it actually does pretty well. But I think part of that is anytime you have the same words in the question and the answer, you get like extra juice, and that's sort of unfair in some ways. So that brings us to solver number 5, which is my character level recurrent neural network. And so the idea was that I was going to build a recurrent neural network and train it on my science sentences, and then somehow use that to answer science questions. So I was going to train an LSTM on my science sentences, and then the idea was that I can feed in the question to the LSTM and compute the probability of seeing the answer given that initial part of it. And this is the dumbest of my ideas in this talk, and also I'm really bad at training LSTMs, so it was kind of doomed from the start, but I used the standard TensorFlow character RNN repo, which anyone can clone and try. And I quickly found that all the junk in the sentences was kind of killing me. So I had to filter out everything that was too long and too short. There were a bunch of URLs in there I had to get rid of. There were a bunch of comments I had to get rid of. A bunch of Wikipedia categories, sentences that had no capital letters, and then these weird marks, which I think were some kind of Wikipedia markup. And so I got rid of about half the sentences that way. Still a lot of junk, but not in a get rid of them with a handful of regexes this way. And so I trained this model for quite a long time, actually. And these were kind of the best sentences I came up with. Science is caused by energy. Science is hidden by fascists. Animals are more full themes. And so these are kind of nonsensical. So they're probably not going to be much help for answering science questions. The children to make know that their word become forced. And the children. So these are the sort of things that were all generated, so not very hopeful. The junk really hurts us a lot. It's also the case that this was a bad idea for some other reasons. That LSTM was really training at a sentence level. So it's trying to predict what does a science sentence look like. But these question answer pairs are mostly in kind of intrinsic and multi-sentence. So if you were to put the question in, that's basically the end of a sentence, and then it wouldn't know how to predict it. We'd be better off if you had science paragraphs, which we don't. And this is what it would look like to feed this thing into our LSTM, and it doesn't look like a science sentence. So it's not going to work very well. And you also have this weird thing where longer answers are less probable, right? So if I have because, there's maybe some small chance it ends there, but that small chance is probably going to be bigger than the chance that we see warm temperature causes plant growth, which is exceedingly unlikely to see. So those are all reasons why it's not going to work, and in fact, it doesn't work. It's about doing random. So what are some ideas I had about making it not random? Get a data set of lots of science questions. As I said, that's really hard. Convert each question answer pair into a valid single sentence. So that's also really hard. And then abandon this approach, and that one is pretty easy. And that was what I chose. And then solver number 6 is the idea of a deep neural network. The idea is if you like it, you can put a GPU on it. And so there's this idea of what's called memory networks, where basically you use a lot of recurrent neural networks to basically remember sentences and look things up. And they're very complicated. And I have like really smart colleagues who are trying to make this work right now and haven't managed to make it work yet. So right now it's still at the then a miracle occurs step. And so what is kind of the moral of this talk? When I joined AI2, I didn't know that much about. I knew a lot about data science. I knew a lot about machine learning. I didn't know as much about kind of AI as a field. But I thought, AI can't be that hard. hard, right? Like, how hard can it be? How hard can it be to answer multiple choice science questions? A fourth grader can do it. Why can a computer not do it? But it turns out it's really hard. And so there's a lot of really interesting market interesting science that's being done. And some people see this and they say that can't be that hard. That can't be that just can't be that hard. Which brings us to solver number 7. Go try it yourself. So go out and clone the Aristo Mini repo and try it. Maybe when you do it, something really cool will happen, or maybe when you do it, nothing will happen. And if you do something that works really well, please let me know. I'd love to hear about it because it's a really hard problem. I mean, it's fun to play with, but it's tough. So thank you. And here's my website, my Twitter. If you're interested in AI2, there's the AI2 website, and that's the AI2 Twitter. If you want to check out Aristo Mini, that's the GitHub URL. And if you want to check out my podcast, that's all up there too. So thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Awesome. All right. So Aristo Mini, so don't Google it. You get GitHub for it, as he said. We'll take one question or so, and then we have an important announcement. So, you want to ask questions? There you go.
Thanks, Joel. Great talk. I'm a scientist now, and I was a terrible fourth grader. So I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more. I can see why this would be a great framework for testing, memory network and stuff. That's really developing right now. But just is there a use case beyond that? Sort of what are you all trying to go for?
So I think I alluded to one slide that the idea is to come up with this more general question answering system. And I think the vision, as I understand it, but this is mostly me kind of reading between the lines, no one said this to me explicitly, is if you look at what are the projects across AI2, our other kind of most flagship project is Semantic Scholar, which is an AI kind of juiced up search engine for academic papers. So you can imagine that if you have one piece which can take a corpus of text and learn to answer questions from it, and another piece which is basically reading every academic paper and extracting all the information and graphs and key concepts from it, then instead of answering multiple choice or standardized test questions, you can start asking questions of the scientific literature. What does the literature have to say about this? And what can I expect in this? And maybe in computer science that's one thing, but now I have, let's say I start doing medical papers and biochemistry papers, and so I can ask questions, what do we know about the interaction of this drug? And so in my mind, that's the long-term where we'd like to get to, but I don't think, don't quote me on that because I don't think that's the official AI2 vision. I don't know what it is, but that's kind of my thing.
Okay, short one? Okay.
So in the spirit of breaking silos, there is a group at DARPA that's trying to do that. It's called Big Mechanism. Do you know that? They basically issued a call to do machine reading of papers in semantic web search for medical to try and figure out mechanisms for cancer based on all of they did systems biology for cancer as their first kind of pass at trying to see if machines can read scientific papers and come up with new pathways we didn't know because of that. So they've been doing it. I haven't been keeping up with what's happened, but they do put out what people develop because DARPA does this really quick turnaround. So I think it seemed like that was the goal.
Say DARPA or Dartmouth?
DARPA.
DARPA, yeah. Okay, yeah, so my job is not to keep on top of the research. I do a little bit, but my colleagues who are actually doing this research are very, well, they're all academics, right? So they go to academic conferences, they write papers for journals, they present. So generally if things are going on that the academic community knows about, they know about it. So, but I'll put up, maybe the academic community doesn't know about the DARPA one either. I'll check it out, thank you.
All right, let's thank our speaker and then go to the important announcement.